Thanks for tuning into the 6-3 podcast. I'm your host, Joel, and my co-host, Isaiah and Ben. My favorite day of the year, the NFL draft, was this past week. And not going to complain about the Lions draft at all. I think they did a really good job. I think they targeted best available, kind of like we talked about with Logan, that Brad Holmes probably would do, because they have enough holes in their roster that I think it's important to draft best player available. So who do you believe is the best pick by the Lions this year, and who was their pick that you scratched your head the most on?
Easiest.
I think the two areas.
The low-hanging fruit, I guess, for the best pick would be Sewell, right? But yeah. I feel like they couldn't really go wrong unless they traded up for some reason there. I feel like, they probably had 2 or 3 guys they were looking at that, could possibly fall into that spot. So I don't really want to say that the best pick was Sewell. I really like the Derek Barnes pick. I like what he brings to the table at linebacker. I feel like he fills a need. He's a tough player, and I just like that it was. I like the savviness to trade up for a guy that they actually wanted, and I like to see that in the later rounds. I don't necessarily love that in the early rounds, especially when you're a team that is rebuilding. I'd rather you trade back, if anything, in the early rounds if you're a team like the Lions. But in the later rounds, if you identify a guy that fits your need and fits what you're looking for, and fits your culture, and you want to go get him, I'm all for trading up to go get a guy like that. So I like that pick, and I just think it shows kind of what the organization was looking for. So.
Yeah, I think so the two areas that I'm probably going to scratch my head, and I'm going to be keeping an eye out for how well these 2 players perform. So I thought Logan Lamorandier, who we had on last week, did a really cool thing on Twitter where he did a poll. After every pick, he did a poll of rate this pick by the Lions, and if they didn't, or who would you have rather them drafted at this position? Like, he replied to himself, and they were both polls. The 2 that, so the 2 picks that I was looking at were when they passed on Jabril Cox, I think in the 4th, and they passed on Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah in the 2nd, and in the 3rd. Didn't they pass him on in the 3rd too?
No, just Onwuzurike was going on.
Yeah, he went to the 2nd in the Browns. So obviously, Koramoah had some health concerns, but now they're cleared. We talked pre-show about whether those health concerns are just like how serious GMs would take them. But regardless, 20-some teams took them very seriously. But if on those polls that Logan did, for both those picks, both the 2nd and the 4th round pick, Jabril Cox was 90% of what people said they would have picked if they were there. And Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was 90%. So those are the only 2 where I was man, if the Lions just want talent and upside, those are the players I would have picked. Because they drafted that way. They picked athletic, they picked upside, they picked guys who you can see on an NFL roster in a couple of years just from their intangibles and their athleticism and the raw talent they have. They might need some refining, especially those later round guys. Those were the 2 picks that I was scratching my head at, was Cox and Koramoah. So I'm definitely going to be watching those 2 players on their teams this year to see, and over the next couple of years, I guess, but just to see how they develop and if it was because I hate to be a fan that's just man, they should have picked them. I'm pissed at Brad Holmes because he didn't pick them. It depends. If Koramoah has health problems, or if he just doesn't perform, and same with Cox, isn't what people thought he would be, then Brad Holmes did a great job, an even better job than we thought, because he passed on him. But if they show out from day one, then it's a big head scratcher of okay, what were they evaluating when it came to some of those players? But so I was surprised that they went so heavily with the defensive line, especially at tackle. It just I assume it's just the scheme that they're running. They needed different players like Penasini last year, or Penasini, however you say his name. Yeah, Penasini.
It's definitely not Penasini. I can tell you that.
was like a great run stopper, but he couldn't do anything else. So they drafted a guy who's a great run stopper and also can get to the quarterback.
Right.
So like definitely they're upgrading that position for sure. But they really went hard at it at the defensive line. So
I think
hopefully they're just saying like, man, we wanted to figure this position out and we feel like we totally figured it out. Because they have 5 years to draft a 22-man roster basically.
Mhm.
Like, so
Yeah.
if they have O-line covered, they have D-line covered, and they got a couple pieces here and there. Awesome. Like next year, work on wide receiver and maybe linebacker. Figure
Maybe
those two out.
quarterback. Maybe quarterback.
Yeah, maybe quarterback. But like, if that's how they're approaching it, where they're saying like, okay, this year we are addressing these two needs, and that's what we're doing the whole draft.
Mhm.
Like, we're gonna pick the best defensive lineman available, and if we like a guy, we're getting it. Like, if that's their philosophy, that's awesome. And that's a philosophy that's a lot better to me than the previous philosophy, which was just like, we're gonna be the Patriots, and we're gonna do things that people aren't expecting.
They thought they were the smartest people in the room. I hated that.
Yeah, and they weren't. And so it seems like Brad Holmes and the crew there are like yeah, they figured out a couple positions. Like their O-line is figured out for a few years. Their D-line, they could use one more edge in my mind, but like it's pretty figured out for a couple years. So
and
like,
I think from the beginning
that.
of this regime, it's kind of been a, we're going to build our team from the middle out, as all football teams probably should be built. And Logan talked about it a little bit last week too, and I agree with him 100%. Like you can't have a team just full of really good skill position guys if you're weak in the middle, and you can't have, the last thing the Lions need, in my opinion, is to build. The last thing in this rebuild they need is to get the skill position guys that'll put them over the top, right? If you are solid up front, on both sides of the ball, you're going to be in ball games, even if your skill position talent might be a little bit lacking, right? You can win football games in the NFL with solid line play. And I think they kind of took that approach. And I think, a lot of it, I'm reading up on some of the stuff that the Lions staff said and their front office has said, like they really wanted to build a solid foundation this year in the draft. Their idea was not necessarily like just go out there and become a world beating team. Like, no, we need to build a solid foundation for this rebuild here. It's a long process, and it's, obviously like it might suck at times, especially this year. I'm kind of anticipating it, but you got to build a solid foundation with this first draft class. And I think they did that with Sewell and with a couple guys up front, and and Barnes at linebacker. I mean, they were drafting guys that fit exactly what they want to do, and build their team from the middle out. And then they still filled a couple needs, getting a DB and getting a receiver that has a high upside receiver, maybe not that guy that would scream star off the page though. So I think it's pretty clear their philosophy was not to go get skill position high end talent, and that's fine. I'm fine with that. I'd rather them focus on the interior and build out from there. And hopefully, as the drafts that in the next 2 drafts, I guess they can kind of address those other needs.
Yeah. So my favorite pick was actually at 101, Ifitu Melifonwu.
Yeah.
And that's just because the Lions have mostly a need at safety if you compare any defensive back position. But
safety. Yeah.
Yeah, but corner is obviously a position that still has uncertainty. Maybe Arwarie was maybe a couple week wonder, and Okudah maybe just still doesn't get it together, and there's still injuries that happen in that defensive backfield. Safety, I got a little upset that Trayvon Morwig wasn't picked at 41 either, that he still had fallen.
Yep.
And then when Uzurike was taken. So there are definitely guys there at 41 that I would have preferred. And then you eventually saw the pattern of back-to-back defensive tackles, and that's why Lee McNeil was probably my least favorite pick.
Yep. He just doesn't stand out in any way.
And these guys that we're picking in the second and third round, like second round at least, needs to be pretty much an every down type of guy. And I'm not sure Uzurike is going to be. I think they're going to rotate that defensive line, to be honest. I think they're just going to kind of try to keep fresh bodies out there, and to me that feels a little bit like a waste again in the second and third round. So I let, because Penasini was picked in the 6th round, and he was out there most of the time, but he's specific to run defense. He's the Walmart version of Snacks Harrison. So like I like Penasini for that value in the 6th round, but if these are guys that we're going to just rotate and try to keep fresh, and they're not going to be like the old days, and Ndamukong Suhs or Sean Rogers or Corey Reddings that we used to keep out there, you know, almost every down except for maybe certain situations, then I feel like it's not a great value pick to have defensive tackle there. So going back to back at the very least with Alim McNeill was a big question mark to me, especially like you guys had brought up. You know, Jabril Cox was still there.
Yep.
And I mean, Cox was still there even after Melvin Fonwu was picked. But to me, you know,
he was still there when Amon-Ra St. Brown got picked.
Yep.
Yeah, but I even liked you know, edge rushers. You know, Alim McNeill was picked. Who went? Like Ronnie Perkins was still there, and I liked him at edge. You know, there were Malcolm Kuntz still there. Like it depends on where you value certain guys, but at edge, you know, it's obviously still a need too. So it just seems like that line now is just it's saturated now with guys that, you know, don't play full time. They're going to try to keep fresh bodies out there and see if that works to get a healthy pass rush every time you're in there and make the most of your opportunities. That's the only logic behind it that I see. So Melvin Fonwu I like because he fills both secondary positions, and I think he's going to see a lot of the field. And then, you know, Amon-Ra St. Brown, you know, and I'm not mad that they picked him there either. I wanted Dyami Brown instead of McNeill as the 3rd round pick.
Yep.
He was still on the board, and I was really hoping they're going to go wide receiver there. And Brad Holmes had a press conference after they drafted Amon-Ra St. Brown and said, now all Lions fans on Twitter can get off my ass about me not drafting a wide receiver.
Right.
A lot of people like Amon-Ra St. Brown. As much as I've looked at him, I'm like, okay, he could be a good like number 3, best case number 2 guy. I just never seen him as a main guy, and I think that still means we're running on Tyrell Williams.
And I think that's the thing. I think Alim McNeill is my least favorite pick. I can see all the other guys like getting significant play at their position this season, but like I don't know. Like as just a 3rd round pick isn't where, especially an early 3rd round pick, isn't where you get a plug and play guy. Like a guy that just helps you keep guys fresh. Like you do that with like a 4th or a 5th round pick. And I thought there was a lot better options. Like, because even at 2, like I thought there were some better options, but like we mentioned JOK, but still Onwuzurike was like, most people had him ranked in the 40s. Like
most people still had him as their 2nd favorite D tackle. Like he was still
he was still like every place I saw had him like in the 40s somewhere. Almost every place I saw was like in the 40s. So it made sense. There were guys that fell that the Lions could have picked and it would have been fine, but I think they just had their sights set on him at that pick. But yeah, just to go same position, like not in, like I understand going same position twice in a row for like a guy that falls that you're like, oh, we almost picked him last round and he fell all the way to this round. Why don't we get him? But it seemed like Alim McNeill, if they really wanted him, could have one traded back or picked him with like one of their 4th rounders. Like I don't think he would have been gone. Apparently the Eagles wanted him. I saw that like the Eagles would have picked him next. So maybe they knew that and they kind of like really wanted him and just got nervous. But yeah, I just think like there were a lot better options in my mind at that.
That's the only one where I wouldn't consider it necessarily a reach because I think he fit other teams' needs at that point more. But I agree kind of with both of what you guys are saying. It's he, you know, we already drafted that position, and I'm not saying I don't think there's anything wrong with picking a position and going heavy on a position necessarily. I'm fine with that, especially, you know, as a team that pretty much needs to blow the whole thing up. But I just feel like there were too many guys in that spot that, you could have gotten for a higher value. And now I'm not, overall I would grade the Lions out pretty highly in this draft. Obviously you never know until probably 2 or 3 years down the road, but that is the only one where I'm going, all right, like I didn't love that one. You know what I mean? Every other one I could see kind of the wheels turn in, or I could kind of understand every single, the thought process is there. But that one for me was like, I didn't even love him at that position at that point. You know what I mean? There were other guys that I feel like had more value later in the draft if you really wanted to double up on defensive tackle. So I don't know. It wasn't my favorite there. That would probably be, I would agree with the worst pick. But couple that with, he could end up surprising, I guess. Certainly.
Yeah.
So.
I think he's got potential. As of now, he just looks like a plug and play. And I think your first 3 rounds, especially on a team that needs work, it'd be nice to get starter value for sure out of there. And I think Derek Barnes has potential too.
Yep.
He's a little undersized, and I think he needs to work on his coverage a little bit, which has been a concern for a long time with Lions linebackers. But